Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the New York Offshore Wind public webinar. We are right at 2 o'clock on time and getting ready to kick off. We're seeing the registration and numbers starting to climb, so we'll start slowly here with a soft kickoff. My name is Adrienne Downey, and I'm NYSERDA's Principal Engineer for Offshore Wind. Really pleased to have the opportunity to connect with you all this afternoon and to offer a number of really exciting and important updates in our program. As you can see by the subheading, we are today reflective of a posture of 4,300 megawatts of offshore wind in active development in the state of New York. So very exciting times, lots to share, lots of great news. But before we kick things off more fully, we'd like to take a moment to thank you for attending today and for your continued interest in New York's offshore wind program and in our team's efforts to grow this important clean energy resource and an inclusive clean energy industry on behalf of New Yorkers. So thank you very much for joining us. Really excited to have this opportunity to share with you. Next slide, please. As we wait for folks to log on, timely to remind folks of a few meeting procedures for your attention and your convenience. We will be recording this session and posting it live to our website in the coming days. So if you happen to miss the immediate kickoff, no worries. We'll be posting it live for your consumption at a later time, and encourage you to settle in. We have, again, a number of really exciting updates for you. We welcome questions and comments in writing through the Q&A feature at any time during this event, as shown here upon the screen. And we also would like to encourage you that if you have any technical problems during this session, please do feel free to contact our incredible team, notably Sal Graven, at the email address that is flagged herewith. But as always, and we'll be concluding this at the end of our presentation today, there's a great opportunity to connect at all times with NYSERDA's offshore wind team through the appropriate channels, and we'll flag that at the end. But just again, a reminder that we will be recording this session, we will be posting it, and we welcome throughout today's discussion questions as submitted through the Q&A feature. Next slide, please. So really, to keep us moving, today's agenda is indeed jam-packed. We couldn't be more excited to share with you the latest recap of what have been just a monumental last few months here in the state of New York, as well as to provide you with a few initiatives that are in the works looking forward. We'll be hearing from several members of NYSERDA's offshore wind team today on a diversity of topics, as well as a very special guest. We'll have Julia Bovey from Equinor Wind US, who will be very pleased to introduce Equinor's latest project awards. We'll also be looking forward again with some educational opportunities that we're really excited to be unveiling in the next couple of months, as well as a whole host of updates with regards to our really broad and diverse research activities and regional collaboration activities. So to help kick us off, and without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce NYSERDA's Acting President and CEO, our fearless leader herself, Doreen Harris.
Thank you, Adrienne, and good afternoon, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be speaking with each of you today. If we could go to the next slide, please. I would certainly be remiss if I didn't provide the necessary reference to New York's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is our landmark law signed into law by Governor Cuomo in 2019. But this law alone sets the path to empower every New Yorker to fight climate change and to provide the opportunity to improve our everyday lives. And through this lens, we at NYSERDA have been very hard at work in advancing many initiatives in fulfillment of the Climate Act, offshore wind being a significant component thereof, for sure. Next slide, please. The Climate Act sets forth many goals for New York, notably on the renewable energy front. We have a goal of 100% zero emission electricity by 2040. As part of that, New York has a goal of 70% renewable energy by 2030. And really more broadly, the goal is to reduce emissions at least 85% below 1990 levels by 2050. So these are ambitious, aggressive, and nation-leading by all accounts. And we in New York have been hard at work to realize the goals and the benefits thereof. Next slide, please. And of the topic today, of course, embedded within the Climate Act is the goal of 9,000 megawatts installed by 2035 that New York is leading the nation, certainly with that goal and the achievement of that goal. You know, to put that in context for you, that can power up to 6 million New York homes. So when we talk about offshore wind, we need to think about it in the context of the game changer that it certainly is, both with respect to serving our citizens, but also bringing forth significant investments and job opportunities to our state. And that is a topic that we're excited to cover in some detail today, really the benefits that we're seeing across our state from this number. Next slide, please. When we put this in context, though, it is important to note that the U.S. offshore wind market only continues to grow. And as we speak, the broader regional U.S. offshore wind market stands at 31.5 gigawatts of offshore wind targets between the states that you see on the pie chart here. Of course, the largest wedge is New York at 9,000 megawatts. But it is important to note that this growing industry, regionally and nationally, is an industry that we in New York are well suited to serve, both with respect to job opportunities as well as the infrastructure needed to support the industry. So this is a huge opportunity for all of us in the U.S. And of course in New York in particular. Next slide, please. And in kicking off 2021, it is only February, but we have been hard at work in achieving the goals as articulated through the Climate Act for several years. But I think most notably, it is the case that we in New York, through Governor Cuomo, have announced the largest combined renewable energy awards ever by a U.S. state, announced in January of this year in his State of the State address, which was a phenomenal day for New York, for sure. Of significance today is the offshore wind awards that were announced for the Beacon Wind and Empire Wind 2 projects, delivering nearly 2,500 megawatts of capacity to New York. And relatedly, the investments in New York's ports that are commensurate with that scale, and the jobs that you will see articulated here, totaling 8,600 or more good paying jobs across New York. It is true that this with an announcement of land-based awards for 24 large-scale land-based renewable projects totaling 2,200 megawatts. Those are primarily solar projects in upstate New York. But together, we are excited and, of course, not surprised that New York is taking seriously the achievement of the CLCPA and Governor Cuomo's commitment to its realization. So today, we will be focusing on just this progress that was announced in January. And with respect to the progress that we are making, I'd like to turn it back to Adrian to talk about our procurement processes and the process that led to this monumental announcement in January. Adrian?
Thank you so much, Dorian. We really appreciate your remarks and helping kick us off. Just as again a housekeeping item, we kindly ask that you maintain yourself on mute throughout this discussion for the courtesy of our listeners, and so that we have a very clear signal. So very kindly, please, if you have not done so, have a look at your settings right now on your computer and kindly mute yourself for the benefit of our listeners. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So indeed, the governor's historic announcement this past January represents an incredibly exciting and important step along our state's pathway to 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. But NYSERDA's work in offshore wind has been ramping up steadily for more than 5 years, well over 5 years now, beginning with preparatory work in support of our state's original 2.4 gigawatt goal via the publication of our seminal and award-winning master plan. That work culminated in our first solicitation that we launched in 2018 and then secured and procured the state in 2019, at which point in time, again, as Doreen just aptly pointed out, you know, our state's ambitions almost quadrupled to 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035 under the CLCPA. Now, this latest solicitation, again, is just an incredibly important next step. We issued a 2020 solicitation in July of last year, and then as part of the State of the State address this past January, confirmed again the awards of two major projects, Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind. Next slide, please. So as we will be hearing more, and to help us set the stage in our background for the state's activities, you know, as in 2018, we effectuated this solicitation in full keeping with the Public Service Commission of New York State's prescribed evaluation criteria that really seeks to prioritize competition and balance price, economic development, and strength of projects in order to drive our state's growth. This year, we recognized, you know, the strategic skill testing question at the end of this on the Q&A as to what you thought that sound was. My guess is baking. In any event, we are, again, very excited that this year, recognizing the strategic importance of port infrastructure and unlocking the economic powerhouse potential of this new industry, we integrated a really novel and exciting approach with port infrastructure as a means by which to amplify our state's post-COVID recovery strategy. So we directly integrated a multi-port procurement strategy alongside our generation solicitation this year to amplify the effects of up to $200 million in public funding with a minimum one-to-one matching of private dollars, receiving bids that combined both offshore wind as well as complementary port infrastructure investments. Next slide, please. So as we're going to be hearing more from Equinor shortly, the results really are epic. Building off of now the Long Island Power Authority's work on their 132 megawatt South Fork wind farm with Ørsted and Eversource, our 2018 solicitation awards, as mentioned, between Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise, again with Equinor and Ørsted and Eversource, each respectively. We now add two more impressive projects to our state's active portfolio of development, notably with Equinor contributing now Empire Wind 2 and Beacon Wind. So as mentioned at the outset, you know, all told, this brings our total portfolio to really an incredible 4,300 megawatts and more. And so to hear more about the details of these projects and of the most recent awards, it is my pleasure now to introduce Equinor's Director of External Affairs, Julia Bovey. Julia?
Thank you so much, Adrian, and thanks to the whole NYSERDA team for all of your incredible work, not just in the last 6 months, but in the last several years on getting us to this amazing point where we are at the moment. So if you want to start, I think you're starting my slide deck. Yeah? Great, thank you, appreciate it. So let's go right into the first slide. And part of what my job continues to be in New York is to introduce Equinor and talk a little bit about who we are. We are a broad energy company, and we are a values-driven company, which has really been a pleasure for me to learn about. Our values are open, courageous, collaborative, and caring. And everything we do, both towards the outside world, but also with each other, is really measured against those values. We are aggressively pursuing the transition to the clean energy future. And New York is a huge part of our overall strategy to make that happen. Next slide. Right now, Equinor is approaching offshore wind. We've recently moved to what we call a cluster format. We have a large cluster in the North Sea, where where we began building offshore wind more than 10 years ago. We are building currently what's the biggest project in the world at 3.5 gigawatts in the North Sea, called Dogger Bank. We're also working in the Baltic Sea. We've had a project operating there in Germany for a couple of years, and we are working hard on a large project in Poland as well. We're looking at Asia, we're looking at the West Coast, but New York is really where our energy is focused, and certainly the most exciting opportunity we see around the globe. And we are grateful, honored, excited that we won this last solicitation by NYSERDA. Next slide. So I would be, even though I'm here today to talk about the new award, I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on Empire Wind 1, which is our first US project. We were awarded a contract for this project in 2019. It's 816 megawatts, which at the time was the biggest project that Equinor had ever proposed. Prior to that, most of our projects were around 300 or 400 megawatts, and that seemed like a big project to us back then. We've always hoped that we would be building this project at South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, and that's been several years in the making. We plan to use gravity-based foundations. That's a type of offshore wind foundation that can be manufactured here in New York State. We also plan to do our operations and maintenance and interconnect the power both in South Brooklyn. So this is sort of how we got our start in New York, and it would certainly have been enough to keep us busy, but we recently had some very big news. So next slide. These are some details about the award that we were so fortunate to win, which was just announced last month. So on this map, let's start with our offshore wind lease area that's just south of Long Island. You can see the pointy end of the pizza slice is Empire Wind 1. The red part, the outer part, is Empire Wind 2. So that project was part of the award, as was the red area in our second US lease area, Beacon Wind 1. So together, this is 2,500 megawatts of renewable power, enough to power 1.3 million US homes. Within the bids for Empire 2 and for Beacon Wind, we included $47 million in workforce development, innovation, and community benefits. To us, being part of creating this new industry in New York includes a responsibility to make sure that offshore wind in general, and our project specifically, are in every way a net benefit to New Yorkers. We also included $25 million to support monitoring of wildlife and commercial fish stocks. We've found in the last few years that we've been working in New York that there's a lot of great research out there to date, but there are even more research projects that are needed so that we can be sure that our projects and other projects in the region are built with the absolute best chance of coexistence and minimal impact on the environment. So these two projects together and the ports which were proposed with them come to 5,200 direct jobs. And those are not the sort of with a multiplier or indirect. Those are the direct positions. And combined, this is an additional $4.5 billion added to the New York State economy. Next slide. A little bit more about Empire Wind 2, 1,260 megawatts. Again, imagine we used to think 800 was a lot. I mentioned that Empire Wind 1 interconnection is scheduled to go into South Brooklyn. We hope to deliver the power from Empire Wind 2 into Nassau County in the general area of City of Long Beach, town of Hempstead. There are several places that we are looking at and working with those communities to find out the best spot. We also plan to continue the use of gravity-based foundations fabricated in New York for Empire 2. Next slide. Oh, and a little bit more about these gravity-based structures. There are basically three main types of offshore wind foundations. There are monopiles, which is a steel tube that goes into the seabed, jackets, which sort of look like the old-fashioned oil rig, and then these gravity-based structures represent about 20% of the wind turbine foundations worldwide. And they made sense for us here because they're made of rebar and concrete, and there is really no place better in the world than New York at making massive structures out of rebar and concrete. So we were really pleased to be able to match our needs with the supply chain we have in New York, and we're excited about the GPS foundations. Next slide. So on to Beacon Wind. This is a lease area that Equinor bid on and won in late 2019. The outlines that you see in the picture around the lease area, those are offshore wind lease areas that are controlled by other developers, our competitors. And the very northern end of that cluster, those are the Ørsted leases for South Fork Wind Farm and Sunrise Wind. So this is an area where a lot of developers have leased area, and our project that we're looking at there, Beacon 1, is about 20 miles south of Nantucket. That's the closest point to shore. Next slide. So New York State, and NYSERDA particularly, was very clever. They asked the offshore wind developers and the port developers to get together and propose detailed investment infrastructure plans for ports to go inside the wind bids for the offshore wind. And so we worked very closely with the landowners and the operators of South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. We identified South Brooklyn Marine Terminal back in 2017 as an ideal place for a staging and assembly port for New York. And frankly, NYSERDA had identified it as well in its port studies done prior to Equinor showing up in the market. So this is an area that has a rich maritime history, part of supplying New York City with just about everything through the sort of first half of the 20th century. And then it's been vacant for quite a while. So we envision this as a place not just for Equinor, but for the whole New York and East Coast offshore wind industry to be able to do the important part of building the project, which is when you bring all of the components together, the towers, the blades, the nacelles, which is the piece that the blades are attached to. You bring them all together and then you assemble each machine in the port and then bring it out to the lease area. So that's marshaling, staging, and assembly. And we're honored that we and our partners at SBMT received matching money from New York to build this port. It's going to be fantastic. We're working closely with the community, which has great ambitions to make this one of the cleanest ports on the East Coast. We are investing heavily in electrification and other low carbon solutions to build the state-of-the-art port here. Next slide. We also plan to site our operations and maintenance, or O&M hub, at South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. This is the facility from which we will operate all of our projects, Empire 1, Empire 2, and Beacon. And it's a spot where the crews will muster, and the ship, the surface operations vessel, will come in and out of this port every 2 weeks for a crew change, reprovisioning, and go back out to the lease area. We'll also have the control room for the electrical system in this building as well. Next slide. Part of the bid, specifically for Beacon Wind, but applying to our whole portfolio, was a proposal for the first ever US offshore wind tower factory to be located up at the Port of Albany. We partnered with two companies that are very experienced in making towers for onshore wind, and we worked with them to design a factory that can make all of the towers for our projects, but also will be capable of making towers for other developers as well, and for any wind turbine company. So there are basically three big wind turbine companies. We have not chosen our preferred supplier yet. all of them would be capable of buying and using the towers that are made in Albany. So we see that as something that should be able to serve the whole New York market for the long term. Next slide. Workforce development has been a big topic since the early days contemplating offshore wind in New York. There have been some great steps and some great positive developments. There are some leaders, particularly Farmingdale State College, also at SUNY Maritime, who have continued to spend a lot of time figuring out what gaps exist in the workforce training in New York and how we can fill them. There are boards and advisory groups working with them on that, and there have been some terrific conversations that are ongoing. The labor unions are at the table for these conversations. They have traditionally been responsible for training their own workers, so we're working closely with them to really try to figure out where's the best place to put the training, where will it have the best access for the next generation of workers. We're also focusing on the just transition, and having South Brooklyn Marine Terminal as the home of our operations and maintenance means that we can really focus on training, recruiting, and hiring in the South Brooklyn community, and making sure that it's workers from these disadvantaged communities who are going to end up having these long-term jobs on the project. Finally, we're working hard to make sure that we understand the difference between the offshore wind applications we expect workers to have and the ones that the U.S. maritime workforce already has, and we can marry these two up. So we want to be clear that we're not reinventing the wheel. We know that there are some strict safety requirements on the U.S. Waterfront, and we want to make sure that we recognize those and don't put workers through more training that they don't necessarily need. Next slide. I want to speak about our goals for community engagement. We have been involved deeply in the communities where we hope to interconnect, where we plan to build facilities for the last few years, but it's never enough. We want to make sure that we're casting a wider and wider net for stakeholders who have an interest in the project. Some of them are interested because of location, but others it's because of an issue that they're concerned about, whether that's marine protection or navigation. There are certainly a lot of things that this project touches on. So in the coming years, look for us to be even more accessible. COVID's been tough. You know, this last summer, I had a plan to be at every single, not me personally, but our team at every single festival and fair on Long Island in New York City to be able to talk to people more about the project. And obviously with COVID, that didn't happen. So we're doing the best we can right now online, and we'll continue to do more. But we also can't wait to get back out into communities and be able to have, spontaneous interactions with people and hear their thoughts and get their ideas. Next slide. So this slide is getting a little unwieldy because as we go on, we are partnering and entering into really exciting agreements with more and more organizations. So I'm worried that I've left some important partners off this list. But we are so fortunate to have groups in New York City that are organized around many, many different areas that we also have a strong interest in. So there are universities such as SUNY, Farmingdale, Columbia, who are looking at offshore wind efficiencies, technical issues, energy policy. All of that is work we really want to support, whether that means financially or in allowing our projects to be part of the research that goes on. One of the partnerships I'm most excited about is with Wildlife Conservation Society, which is home to some of the world's leading scientists who are protecting marine mammals, and specifically the North Atlantic right whale. We funded 2 high-tech buoys in the lease area where these scientists can really keep track of all types of whales, where they're going, what they're doing, their vocalizations. And the goal is to make New York Bight a safer place for marine mammals. They're endangered now because of ship strikes and fishing entanglements. But if we can show mariners where the whales are and how to avoid them, then we believe that they could have a big benefit. So again, this list continues, but we're grateful for the high amount of interest in the many different topics. And I think I'll have to figure out a different way to make this slide because the list, I believe, will continue to grow. So I think there's one more, and I don't want to run over time. Next slide. On fisheries outreach. It's very important to mention because from day one, our goal has been to coexist with the current users of the lease area, whether they're whales or fishermen. And we believe that that is entirely possible, that we can design this project in a way that fishermen will be able to continue fishing safely and successfully in the lease area. We have engaged closely with them from the very beginning, from really before we even got the Empire lease area. And consultations with fishermen, which can be anything from formal to going down to the dock with a map and a chart and rolling it out and saying, where do you fish, where do you not fish, what gear do you use here? So it's resulted in creating layouts, both in Empire and in Beacon, that are consistent with how fishermen have told us they use these areas and how they want to continue using them. So I'm proud of that work that Equinor has done. We have fisheries liaisons who keep monthly port hours at several fishing ports so that they can just be there if fishermen ever have any questions. And we continue an active online presence in trying to be, have our door open to fishermen for continued conversations. So I think that's the last slide. And I just want to make clear to everyone who's on this call, thank you for your interest. And Equinor plans to be here for minimum 30 years, but hopefully a lot longer operating these projects. And, I joke that this will be my last job in my career, but that's a good thing because that's part of becoming a part of a community and being accountable. And that's certainly our goal. So thank you. Here's my email. Always open to feedback. So please let me know. And back to you, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Julia. I really appreciate it. And we'll just leave your email up here on the screen for just one quick moment more in case there are any additional questions. Just use it as another opportunity to, again, remind folks that we will be posting this on our website in the coming days, so you'll have more opportunities. So next slide, please. And again, thank you so much, Julia. We really appreciate you taking the time to help share your projects. Great. So as we've just heard, Equinor's commitments bring tremendous project strength to our portfolio and powerfully unlock, major economic development through port infrastructure being the theme of 2020 and beyond. With these awards, we are really excited that we have not only 5 active offshore wind projects, as we alluded to at the beginning of this presentation, but also 5 active ports now in develop that collectively include Montauk Harbor and Port Jefferson Harbor, which are servicing operations and maintenance activities in support of the Ørsted Eversource portfolio of projects, namely Sunrise Wind and South Fork Wind. The nation's first offshore wind tower manufacturing plant with partnerships between the Port of Albany and Marmon and Welcon all together, as Julia mentioned. We're doing gravity-based substructure foundation fabrication of the Port of Coymans, wind turbine assembly and staging, as well as long-term operations and maintenance for Equinor's portfolio at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal in Sunset Park. And so, this is really showing just how quickly our markets are growing, how important this port infrastructure is, and with the benefit of anchor investments and project orders to support support what it will be really transformational port improvements, it's important to recognize that these assets represent, and Julia alluded to this, but to put a fine point on it, not only major and substantial commitments, to job growth and economic development growth potential in each of these areas, they also represent open access investments that will be ready to service future generations of offshore wind projects in New York State and in the northeastern US, as well as potentially, and particularly as we look to the example of the Port of Albany tower manufacturing facility, potentially to service New York's significant onshore renewable energy projects as well. So again, this potential to help grow our clean energy economy is pivotal in all of the work that we do for offshore wind. Next slide, please. And in so doing, we would be remiss without shining an important light on the second announcement that Governor Cuomo issued in January, which was, in addition to these projects, a major commitment to growing an inclusive and just clean energy economy for New York. So we launched the first $3 million of the full $20 million of the Offshore Wind Training Institute in January. That is live now. This first solicitation that you can find on our website as a Program Opportunity Notice, or PON 4595, is again live now for $3 million and focuses squarely on disadvantaged communities and priority populations, recognizing the urgency of early skills development, as well as support for supply chain development and localization. So these are our clear, early and strategic priorities of the state and again, ensuring that we build an inclusive and just clean energy opportunity for all New Yorkers. And we would flag that the ongoing work with the SUNY hubs, Stony Brook University and Farmingdale State College, will be continuing its research to understand what successive solicitations, again, this is the first 3 million of 20, what do those future offerings look like? How will they best service, the needs and the gaps between New York's exceptional workforce with this new industry, and making sure that we offer the right skills development at the right time, and the opportunities to educate up to 2,500 New Yorkers. So really exciting news, and encourage you please to go and have a look if you are interested in those funding opportunities. They are live now. The solicitation is open and accepting bids until, or proposals, excuse me, until March 16th, 2021, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and hoping to make awards in summer of 2021. So next slide, please. And with that, we shift now from our latest awards announcements and into our really considerable research and regional collaboration efforts. My colleague Greg Lampman will lead us. So Greg.
Thank you, Adrian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Lampman. I manage NYSERDA's environmental research program, the goal of which is to inform energy and environmental policy with science and data. And the environmental research program has been an integral component of the offshore wind team since its inception about 5 years ago. So we've been part of this since the beginning. Can I get the next slide, please? One of the new studies we want to announce today is a climate adaptation and resiliency study that's been posted. Climate adaptation and resiliency are concepts that are being built into all the aspects of NYSERDA's work. If you've haven't had an opportunity to look at our 2020 to 2023 strategic outlook that was posted earlier this month, it's worth digging into. The strategic plan summarizes multi-year objectives, ongoing programmatic efforts, and strategic areas of focus for 2021 through 2024. And it's really organized around NYSERDA's key mission outcomes. And they include greenhouse gas emission reductions, renewable energy, energy efficiency, the clean energy economy, and resilient and distributed energy systems. And the strategic outlook goes out of the way to explain how people sit at the heart of all of these efforts. But this study that's being published is our first really deep dive into how to embed resiliency into one of NYSERDA's program components. It brings together the knowledge and distills the information about practices and options that can be considered in the development of offshore wind energy that ensure that our investments are protected over the long term, and that they're able to respond to climate changes through resiliency strategies, issues like extreme wind and sea level rise and storm surge. So again, our first deep dive into this, but you can expect to see a lot more of this from NYSERDA in the coming months. Next slide, please. Shifting gears a little bit, as part of the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act that was released this past April, that act actually included three primary components, one of which was the development of the Office of Renewable Energy Siting here in New York, which has become the central permitting agency for all terrestrial large-scale renewable projects for the state of New York. Another outcome of that act was the development of the Build Ready program. That program positions NYSERDA in the role of identifying areas where large-scale renewable energy development could take place, but which are not readily accessible to commercial developers. I'm referring primarily to brownfields, landfills, and previous industrial sites. So the intention there is for the Build Ready program to partner with host communities to work on these sites and try to advance them through the permitting and all approval processes, and then ultimately sell those projects to commercial developers to build and operate bundled with RECs. And then the third component of the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act is the Power Grid Study. And the overarching intention here is to understand how we can make sure that our renewable energy that is being sited across the state is able to get into the system and distributed to the folks who can use it. So the Power Grid Study actually consists of three. There's a component that was executed by the joint utilities, so the utilities across the state, looking at transmission and distribution needs. There were studies around the zero emissions, which is informing our ability to achieve 70% renewable generation by 2030 and a zero emission grid by 2040. And then one component that was specific to offshore wind energy, looking at ways in which we can connect offshore wind energy to onshore bulk power transmission. And how do we actually achieve our goal of integrating 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind into that system? Next slide, please. You can find the Power Grid Study on the Department of Public Services Matter Master by searching the case number 20-E-0197. And there is a lot of information embedded in these studies, but we pulled out four particular ones, four high-level findings just to bring forth today. The first is that through radial lines, we believe that we can integrate 9 gigawatts of offshore wind energy into the system without major bulk transmission upgrades. And I'll emphasize the major. There are some considerations here. So it is going to take some work and some action, but it looks like we can integrate 9,000 megawatts. And the intention is to interconnect the maximum amount as possible into the load center that is New York City. So we're looking at 6+ gigawatts going into New York City would be advantageous. The permitting complexities around getting those 6 gigawatts into New York City are complicated. And we need to think about how we can best coordinate on those cables to make sure that we're able to achieve the goals. And finally, a mesh configuration of offshore wind transmission provides a lot of flexibility in terms of deliverability and options. And so a mesh system is basically interconnection of the projects themselves in the offshore space, which provides some optionality as to how the energy flows back to shore. But that study, or that series of studies, is available, and I would encourage you, if you have an interest, to go through them in detail. There's a lot of information embedded in them. Next slide, please. Shifting gears again, as many of you know, NYSERDA has been leading some pre-development activities. The intention of these studies are really to provide an investment into what is currently identified as draft wind energy areas in the New York Bight. We're trying to provide information to developers and to stakeholders earlier in the process, hoping to reduce risk around those sites, and a reduction in risk we expect will translate into a reduction in costs. So we see these projects as investments in the space that we would recoup through reduced offtake costs. The first one is we last year deployed 2 Met-Ocean Flight Hour buoys into Hudson North and Hudson South. Both of these buoys have been validated through the Carbon Trust process and are collecting what could be termed as bankable data. We completed 1 year of data collection this past fall and have synthesized that information into an interim report that's available at the website noted here. The website, the data from those buoys is updated monthly, and that's available on this website as well. What the report really does is it takes those wind speed data at the different hub heights and puts them into indicative areas representing 800 megawatt projects using 14 megawatt, 18 megawatt, and 22 megawatt machines. And it provides the P50 and the P99 data. So it's a way of taking our first year of data and making it more understandable to the folks who would be interested. Those metocean buoys are additionally outfitted with a number of environmental sensors to understand migratory birds, marine mammals, tagged fish species, and other measurements as well. We recently, this past fall, completed a geophysical survey using Gardline's Ocean Endeavor. The geophysical survey is a preliminary survey. It's not to the same level of detail as a developer would complete, so it's a planning level survey. The spacing on the transects is between 900 and 1,800 meters. So we're trying to confirm what people understand about the space. We completed those transects in Hudson North and Hudson South, so all three of those areas. And that data is being finalized now, and the reports will be coming out shortly. So we expect them to come out in a sequence over the next month or two. The final one, I think many of you have heard of, is our digital aerial survey of wildlife across the New York Bight. We conducted 4 digital aerial surveys over 3 years, starting in the spring of 2016 and running through the spring of 2019. These surveys were conducted over the full Bight, so 12,700 square miles of surveys. And through this process, we've collected more than 3.5 million images of the Bight. Norman Doe has been going through that imagery, and we've identified approximately 98% of those images are blank. So there's a lot of open ocean out there without animals on the surface or flying over the surface. But we did capture and identify more than 100,000 animals. So it provides a decent representation of the spatial and temporal distribution of these wildlife across the space. Again, the intention here is to invest in this space to try to understand what the risks and opportunities are, hoping to recoup our costs through reduced offtake prices. Next slide, please. NYSERDA has been working and encouraging regional collaboration in a number of ways. Many of you are aware of the Regional Offshore Science Alliance, which is called ROSA. That organization is focused on issues in science around fish and fisheries work, and has been up and running for approximately a year or so now. And again, the intent of that organization is the intent is to organize data, organize stakeholders, and organize research monitoring to result in the greatest outcomes and to identify research needs and gaps so that we can try to begin to fill those gaps. Simultaneously, NYSERDA has been leading with the Mass Clean Energy Center, a regional wildlife science entity. And the intention here is to provide a sister entity to ROSA. So the Regional Wildlife Science Entity will be looking at organization of data, research and monitoring around wildlife in the space, up to and including fish. So we're collaborating closely with ROSA to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. We want to make sure there's no daylight between the two organizations as well. So the solicitation has been finalized and will be coming out in the next week or two, with proposals due in March to select an entity who will be serving as the lead of the Regional Wildlife Science Entity. This work is a combination of approximately 2 years of stakeholder engagements through a series of workshops and meetings and different levels of groups and organizations. So it's been well vetted, but we think we've refined the mission and objectives quite well, and we'll be looking for an entity to start that up and build a process which is similar in alignment to the way the ROSA organization is functioning today. Next slide, please. And bringing it around to our most recent procurement. So in our last procurement in 2019, New York State was the first state to require the provision of environmental and fishing mitigation tools. And through that process, we've learned a great deal about what mitigation requirements are appropriate at the stage of offtake. Taking into consideration the concerns and issues identified by the environmental and the fishing technical working groups and others, but also thinking about how the programs need to evolve over time, the projects need to evolve over time and adapt to the conditions. So in the first round in 2019, we listed the things that were of concern to the stakeholder groups and let developers propose to how they would address those issues. From that process for the 2020 solicitation, we actually populated those mitigation plans with standardized requirements for all proposing developers, thereby setting a baseline of standard that that proposing developers would need to live up to. It talks to how they would be engaging with stakeholders and some measures, in fact, they would need to consider in the development of their projects, specifically around wildlife, potential impacts to wildlife from noise, vessel strikes, lighting, and related measures. So again, our intention here is to bring some standardization to the way in which projects developed for New York are treated, and make sure that we're holding a bar that is representative of what our environmental and fishing stakeholders are interested in. Additionally, in the 2020 solicitation, we issued the first in the nation announcement of requiring $10,000 per megawatt for winning developers to provide in terms of monitoring of key commercial fish stocks and wildlife. From our stakeholder groups, we have learned that there is a limited amount of data as it relates to monitoring, and we want to understand how this development will impact these systems in the long term. So this money is designed not to displace the work that a developer would be required to do in terms of achieving its permits, but augment that to better understand how we can advance the industry and use information for adaptive management purposes to enhance co-use of the space by commercial fishing and wildlife and offshore wind. So again, we are working with Equinor on how these funds will be used. It's part of our contracts negotiation, but ultimately that contract is going to result in about $25 million in monitoring funds that will be split between key commercial fish stocks and wildlife. So more to come on that as that process develops. But with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Kate McClellan-Press, who will be speaking today about our technical working groups and some of the environmental research work that we've been doing. Kate?
Thank you, Greg. The regional efforts, research, and requirements around wildlife and fisheries that Greg just spoke of are the result of long-term and ongoing dialogues we are having with stakeholders. One of the processes we use to engage with stakeholders is New York's technical working groups, or as we like to call them, TWIGs. We have 4 TWIGs, each composed of offshore wind developers and relevant key stakeholders with either environmental, fisheries, maritime, or jobs and supply chain expertise. We also have representatives from federal agencies and regional state agencies, recognizing that offshore wind development issues cross both state and federal boundaries. Our TWIG meetings provide members an opportunity to share their expertise and interests with each other as well as with the state, and also allows for early dialogues around problem solving. Next slide, please. The TWIGs provide advice and recommendations to inform decision-making at multiple levels. The TWIGs can bring in additional outside expertise to develop guidance and to inform specific projects and actions. And as representatives of key stakeholder groups, they also help us keep the broader community informed and involved. The TWIGs also have a role in project-specific guidance, as Greg just mentioned. For example, the E and F TWIGs are consulted to evolve project-specific mitigation plans to reduce risk to wildlife and fishermen. Next slide. The mission of the E-TWIG is to develop transparent, collaborative processes to identify and prioritize environmental research needs, facilitate regional coordination, and to develop best management practices for wildlife in ways that both improve outcomes for wildlife and reduce permitting risk and uncertainty for developers. Over the past year, the E-TWIG has supported a number of initiatives, including those shown here. Last March, we had an expert workshop convened to develop research frameworks to understand how birds and bats may interact with offshore wind developments. A meeting summary will be available this February, and a research framework report will be completed by the end of this year. We've also been working to standardize data collection and data sharing by offshore wind developers and the greater research community, as this has been identified as a high priority. New York also requires our offshore wind projects to develop plans to share environmental data. We are finalizing a report with recommendations on ways to best publicly share data, which will be published later this spring. The E-TWIG also hosted its second State of the Science workshop on offshore wind and wildlife in November, and we have the third planned for 2022, which I'll come back to in a moment. Lastly, the E-TWIG plans to meet virtually up to 6 times this year, with our first meeting actually being held tomorrow. And all of the work that the E-TWIG does, as well as summaries and presentations from all of our meetings, are available on our website, nyetwg.com. Next slide, please. A quick note on the 2020 State of the Science workshop, which was the largest workshop on offshore wind and wildlife to date, attended by more than 450 people virtually, was focused on understanding the potential cumulative effects to wildlife from offshore wind development. Presentations were given by European researchers who have years of experience with operational offshore wind, US researchers with expertise in our local marine environment, offshore wind developers, and US agency representatives. Our workshop will continue this year with 7 working groups led by technical experts who are developing research agendas with key studies that could be conducted in the short term to improve our understanding of cumulative biological impacts as the offshore wind industry develops in the US. A final webinar on this will be held in May, and a workshop report will be published this year to summarize the outputs and recommendations of these working groups. Next slide, please. In 2019, NYSERDA awarded around $2 million to fund 5 research projects to better understand the offshore environment and fisheries and the potential impacts of wind development. We contracted with 2 groups to help model the trophic dynamics of our offshore environment and to understand the implications of wind development on key species. One will use a hydrodynamic model that simulates oceanographic characteristics to predict species, habitat preferences, and movements. And the second study uses detections of forage fish from the digital aerial surveys that Greg talked of before to better understand and predict changes in behavior, abundance, and long-term population trends of marine predators. We are also working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to develop standardized monitoring protocols to inform the use of nanotags to monitor bird movements at offshore wind developments and to quantify species-specific risks. And with that, I would like to let my colleague Morgan Brumbauer, New York Offshore Wind Marine Fisheries Manager, to talk about our fisheries research and FTWIG.
Thank you, Kate. As Kate mentioned, my name is Morgan Brumbauer, and I am the Offshore Wind Marine Fisheries Manager here at NYSERDA. If you could just go back to the last slide, please. The last 2 bullets on this slide depict a couple of fisheries-specific research projects. One being NREL's project on addressing commercial fishing access within energy areas has the overall goal to collaboratively develop technical strategies and tools to minimize the disruption of commercial fishing within offshore wind arrays, while also ensuring economical energy generation and safe operation for developers. This is a 2-year project that started in mid-2020 and is currently working on relevant literature searches, surveys, and mitigation measures. The final bullet on this slide projects ROTA's project on the creation of a fisheries data trust, which has the goal of developing an industry-owned knowledge trust that allows fishermen to own, use, and share their data while retaining granular control over its ownership, use, and sharing. The trust is also being developed to enhance the regulatory process for offshore wind and other ecosystem services by dramatically improving the overall understanding of the current state of fisheries and the ecosystems in which they operate. This is also a 2-year project that has started in early 2020 and so far has completed various governance documents, data platform and query tools, and standardized data request forms. Next slide, please. As Kate mentioned above, the FTWIG is composed of several members, including core members from the fishing industry from across New England and the Mid-Atlantic, and offshore wind developers who hold leases in the space, as well as advisory members, which consist of state and federal regulatory agencies. I would like to just remind everyone that the FTWIG has a new website, as seen on the slide here. The website is made up of several pages, including an announcements page, which provides updates on fisheries research, current offshore wind news, and important public comment period opportunities for fishermen or other stakeholders to be engaged with. There's also what I call an interactive lease mapper tool, which is pretty handy for identifying basic information about the different leases that exist in the offshore space. It includes information about which developer holds the lease, which state or states have procured energy from the leases, what the names of the projects are and potential project sizes, as well as important fisheries liaison contact information. There's also an interactive MMP tool on the website, which breaks down best management practices by species, project development stage, and various other important metrics. Finally, there are a couple of topic-specific pages on the FTWIG website, including one on transit and one on mitigation plans, as well as all of the meeting summaries for the FTWIG meetings to date. Due to COVID, unfortunately, we were unable to have in-person meetings, but still held 2 virtual meetings in the summer of 2020 and plan to go ahead with all virtual meetings for 2021. I'm also very excited to announce that NYSERDA's recreational fisheries liaison, Captain Tony Delernia, has created an informational video about offshore wind for the recreational fishing industry, and that link can be seen on the slide above. Also, the FTWIG focuses on ways to improve coordination and communication among the fishing industry and offshore wind industry. Some of the actionable items that the group has worked on includes several documents that could be used by various stakeholders to improve communication. This includes the creation and development of the offshore wind cabling activities document, which aims to provide an impartial, fact-based technical document to help improve stakeholder understanding on how offshore wind cables work, as well as impacts to and from cables by ocean users. This document is scheduled to be released in the late winter or early spring of this year. Also, the technical working group is working on the creation of an overview of fisheries compensation, which is an attempt to provide an overarching, impartial look into a topic that has become very important to fishermen. The goal here is to have a document that provides or coalesces the background information needed to understand the complexities and common themes of this topic. Finally, I'm excited and very proud to announce the public release of the Offshore Wind Opportunities for Experienced Mariners report. Next slide, please. NYSERDA contracted with a consultant, RCG, to draft the report about offshore wind opportunities for experienced mariners, and utilized feedback from the fishing and offshore wind industries while building the report out. The report was an attempt to understand the experience and skill set of the fishing industry, identify jobs that exist within offshore wind that can best match these skills, and understand the needs to address potential skill sets through the use of training or additional certifications, as well as project the number of these specific jobs. A key focus of the report was on supplemental jobs, those that range from several days to up to 3 months, as it is a major priority for New York State to keep skilled fishermen fishing so that those in the industry can maintain their traditional means of making a living. A couple of key findings or recommendations from the report include that the current skill set among fishermen and minimal training could position members of the fishing industry to take advantage of opportunities that exist if they so choose, but individual situations likely differ than those of the entire industry. Also, any development of training needs would require partnerships between members of the fishing industry, offshore wind developers, and maritime safety experts to develop a program that best fits the requirements of the U.S. maritime safety standards and capabilities of the U.S. fishing fleet. I will now turn the presentation over to Haiyan Soon, who will discuss the updates to the National Offshore Wind R&D Consortium. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Haiyan Soon, project manager in NYSERDA. Focused mainly on the National Offshore Wind R&D program support. So I'll give a quick update. Next slide, please. The National Offshore Wind R&D Consortium was established in 2018 with total $41 million Half of that was supported by DOE, and the other half was matched by NYSERDA. The consortium funding source today also include membership contributions, as well as some funding from the state, such as Massachusetts, Virginia, and Maryland. The R&D consortium mainly focus on reducing the LCOE for the offshore wind in U.S., supporting innovations to remove technical and supply chain barriers, increase U.S. job opportunities in green energy. The consortium collaborates across nations with OEM, developers, other public state agencies, or independent institutes. Its membership has been growing. On the right-hand side of this page, it shows the logos of its current members. Next page, please. Since it's established, the consortium has released 2 solicitations so far. The first solicitation was a rolling solicitation that was closed in the end of 2019. We selected total 20 projects with total 11 million funding. The second solicitation was released last summer. It has 3 rounds. The last round was closed last October. Established about $9 million. So the first round, in the first round, we selected 5 projects. That was just published about a few weeks ago in the website. The round 2 and round 3 are still under review and approval. The plan is to select the project and announce them by the end of next month. The 2 solicitations combined together provides about $20 million funding in support R&D in offshore wind. We received overwhelming proposals from across nations. About total more than 150 proposals, high quality proposals were received. As of today, 20 million projects have been selected and announced. The 2 solicitations have slightly different focus areas, but in general, they both cover the 3 pillars as defined in the Offshore Wind Consortium roadmap. Pillar number 1 is focused on the plant technology advancement, such as the supporting structure or the array performance and design. The pillar number 2 is about power plant resource and physical site characterization. Number 3 is about installation, operation and maintenance costs or supply chain solutions, such as how to address the Jones Act requirement, monitor and diagnostics, etc. Next page, please. Of the total 25 projects that we selected so far, 13 of them already signed agreement. So they are in different stage of the execution stage. As you can see from this page, the awardees including universities, national labs, OEMs, developers, and small startup companies. The projects vary from feasibility study, product development, or product demonstration. Next page. Next page, please. Yeah, this page. So on this page, I'm showing we still have 12 projects that we selected. As of today, they are still in contract negotiation. Combine the previous page and this page, you can see that the awarded projects cover all the 3 pillars as we mentioned on the previous page. And they address different challenging areas as faced by the offshore wind industry today. As I mentioned before, we will have more projects announced pretty soon once we finish approval of the round 2 and round 3 from the recent solicitation. Next page, please. In addition to award R&D projects, the consortium also organized webinars and events to build a strong network in the offshore wind community. Next month, March 19th, there is going to be a webinar on grid integration. Hitachi ABB and EPRI will talk about grid stability and integration challenges as well as strategies. In November, the consortium will host the second annual technical symposium. The first symposium was hosted last year, in November as well. It attracted more than 800 attendees over the 3 days of virtual event. If you missed that, the recorded videos are still available to watch online. The consortium will organize monthly webinars for different subjects. So to understand more information about the Offshore Wind R&D Consortium, you can contact with the email shown here or check the consortium website as I list on this page. Thank you. And now I will turn it over to our colleague, Jana Herndon. Jana, please.
Thank you, Haiyan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jana Herndon, Project Manager with NYSERDA's Offshore Wind team. Next slide, please. I'm very excited to tell you about a program that NYSERDA is developing to educate young people about offshore wind and empower them to share what they've learned in their communities and to get involved in the clean energy movement. The program is called the Offshore Wind Youth Action Program, pronounced OYA for short. OYA will include a toolkit of educational materials and activities that will be published on NYSERDA's website, designed for kids in grades 6 through 12. These materials will speak directly to young people so that OYA will be broadly accessible, whether you're a curious teenager learning independently, a family learning together, an after-school club, a school teacher with a full classroom, or an educator working with young people at a library, nature center, science museum, or other venue. To help inform the design of the program, NYSERDA hosted a listening session webinar on November 5th, in which we heard from 4 panelists working at the intersection of youth leadership and environmental justice. If you missed the webinar, the full recording is available on NYSERDA's YouTube channel. OYA will be released this spring with a series of virtual launch parties. If you're interested in receiving updates about OYA, please visit our website. The URL is on the slide. It's nyserda.ny.gov/OWYA, and please sign up for the OYA email list. Next slide, please. Also coming soon, NYSERDA will be hosting a series of webinars featuring outside experts discussing key topics in offshore wind, such as technologies, development processes, and research findings. We will be advertising these webinars through email blasts. So if you haven't already signed up for our offshore wind email list, please visit our website, offshorewind.ny.gov, to sign up. And with the next slide, please, I will turn it back over to my colleague, Adrian, to lead us through a time of Q&A. Adrian?
Thank you so much, Jana. I really appreciate those updates, and they are indeed really exciting, exciting new areas of our program growth. And likewise, thanks to our colleagues, Greg, Kate, Morgan, and Haiyan. Really an impressive body of work, and I hope you're all exceedingly proud of the work that is ongoing. But it is indeed ongoing, and lots more to do. So we are now about 15 minutes out to the end of our session here. We're going to turn momentarily to our Q&A. Thank you again for contributing your questions in the chat. We will get to as many of them as we can. But 2 things that I would like to, again, reassert for your awareness is that, again, we have been recording this presentation, but we will also be publishing it to our website within the coming, week or so, to make sure that it is available, including all of the myriad links that had been shared throughout this presentation, and really encourage you to spend some time with the content and to follow up. There's a lot of great work, and it's always a challenge to cram it in here in what goes very, very quickly as a webinar. So please do avail yourself of the opportunity to learn more. Likewise, if you haven't been able to get your questions in, standing offer to contact our team via email at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. standing offer, and we're always glad to be of service. In a perfect world, as you know, this team is chomping at the bit to be back in the communities talking about offshore wind. It is really exciting news that we have to share, and a lot of questions we can appreciate from communities, and it's always been a pillar of our program to be as transparent and accessible as we can in our engagements. COVID is continuing to make that effort a challenge, so we very much again invite you to reach out, connect with us, send us your questions. We are eager to respond and to be available to service your needs. So with that, we can turn to our first couple of questions. I'm going to take the first one, if we can, which is with regards to the multi-port strategy. So the question is, how do we gain details into the strategy that was implemented? Which ports and what scope was assigned to each? And so the response to that, I would encourage the questioner to go to our webpage, to our website, so offshorewind.ny.gov. We have a solicitation page which serves to support a one-stop shop, if you will, of all of our activities relating to the 2020 procurement. It showcases very explicitly the pre-qualification process that the state undertook when we made the commitment of making $200 million or up to, $200 million of public funding available. The pre-qualification of potential ports to access that funding was a step that we undertook in the fall of 2019, an RFQL process. There were 11 ports that were specifically pre-qualified as part of that initiative, and that rendered them eligible for inclusion in this most recent solicitation. The natural next question, and indeed we did get a question to this effect, is the potential for additional port infrastructure. So are there ports above and beyond those 11 pre-qualified ports that New York State can potentially be developing, or that the industry can be developing in New York? And the answer is absolutely. There are a lot of ports. We have been doing steady work on the subject of port infrastructure, again recognizing its inevitable and important connections to the offshore wind industry and its localization here in our state. We published our first comprehensive port look in 2017, and followed up with very detailed studies again in 2018. And this has been helping to inform our approach, helped to inform our thinking as we entered into the 2019 RFQL process, and then likewise helped to inform our thinking now. But really, those early stage surveys demonstrated more than 50 ports all around the state, with superb and diverse capabilities to potentially support different aspects of the offshore wind industry. And under no circumstances does this foreclose those opportunities with those ports. This was a specific solicitation run in time to support the administration of the competitive allocation of state funding to these ports. But absolutely, we encourage that if your community has port infrastructure and you are interested in becoming part of the offshore wind industry, and that is a potential use that is of interest to you locally, that you engage with the offshore wind community and to see what the opportunities may exist. So certainly we encourage that on an ongoing basis. At this current moment in time, there's really an incredible need brewing and growing for offshore wind port infrastructure. Another question, pivoting in topics right now, that I will call upon my colleague Greg Lampman to discuss. I'd like to ask Greg, we have a question, and I think it's an important question that's on many minds right now. What is the plan and timing for future seabed auctions for the New York Bight?
And this is, as you know, Adrian, a popular question that gets asked in each one of our webinars. And so I want to just take a moment and flashback as to how we've gotten to where we are today. So a quick recap on the history. So back 5 years ago, we started with our master planning process, where we were pulling together stakeholders and data to inform, in part, our process to advance offshore wind for New York State, but also to understand the areas in the New York Bight that would provide the greatest opportunities with the least risk for development of offshore wind. And through that process, we were investigating an area of some 12,000 square miles, and we narrowed it down to what we termed our area for consideration and presented that to BOEM as the area we thought did in fact present the greatest opportunities for offshore wind with the least risk to stakeholders and wildlife. With that presentation, BOEM picked that process up and began a public process of engagement to advance those areas, and came out with what they termed the draft wind energy areas, which to a very large degree replicated what we came up with in our process. So there was a lot of alignment in our thinking with the BOEM thinking. At the last BOEM task force on this topic, we were discussing the draft wind energy areas, and NYSERDA presented its position on how and why they should be converted. There's really two pieces to this. So first, the goals in New York State at 9 gigawatts, and the goals have changed in New Jersey. They've gone up to 75 or 7.5 gigawatts. There's a lot of demand for resource. These areas could potentially provide that resource, and our recommendation to BOEM was to convert those areas and as much of them as possible into lease areas so that they could be further considered for development. The second piece is that those areas should be converted in one operation. So rather than separating what they were terming as draft wind energy areas, primary and secondary, we laid out a rationale as to why those areas should be converted in one regulatory action. And it really goes to consideration of stakeholders, and that includes the developers as well as the ocean users. So for example, if you look at the configuration of the primary and secondary areas, end up with lease areas that are non-contiguous or unusual geometric shapes. What that results in is a turbine array that is less than efficient, which could potentially impact the overall energy density of the project. So you might have lesser energy coming out of an area than it could otherwise if those areas were converted in one motion. So we encourage BOEM to think about the areas that they identified as draft wind energy areas in entirety, to convert them in one action, to develop lease areas that were contiguous and of reasonable shapes to maximize our energy density within them, and to consider in that process how transit could move between wind energy areas, providing some certainty for the developers who are leasing them, as well as for the fishermen and others who need to transit the space. So in doing it in one course of action, you could provide all of that. Additionally, for New York State, our power grid study, one of the challenges we were dealing with was understanding where the resource was coming from. And transmission planning takes a great deal of time. So really understanding what our available resources and where those resources are would be hugely influential on decision-making around resource or transmission planning opportunities. So there are a host of reasons why we think those areas should be converted and why they should be converted in one motion. And again, that's all documented in our last BOEM task force meeting. We were glad to see some statements coming out of Jim Bennett, the program director for BOEM's renewable energy programs recently, suggesting that BOEM will be considering and advancing those areas in the near term and updating their information based on recent feedback. Some of that feedback is the information that we've been gathering in the space, but additionally, as I suggested, we've been working with Rhoda and commercial fishermen on where and how they transit the New York Bight, and that should be considered in the process. So it feels like the process is going in the right direction, and we're interested in engaging with BOEM when they're ready to help expedite that process. And I'll go back to Adrian.
Thank you very much, Greg. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been many years of discussion now with the prospect of new leasing, and important to characterize the extent of the work that has been done to really buttress the state's recommendations and the the opportunity for next steps in expeditious fashion. So yes, we're all very excited and encouraged by the prospect of a near-term option. That's certainly what we're looking for. Pivoting to a couple of questions, I'd like to ask Julia Bove. We've got a couple of questions that have been coming in for you, if we may. The first one is, I'm sure an easy one. What is the timeline for construction of your projects, please?
Great question. It's driven a lot by our overarching federal permit. It's our construction and operations plan. And what we've seen with projects that were ahead of us up in Massachusetts is that there has been a little bit of delay there. So luckily, we allowed a nice big cushion in our timeline. But we need to get that construction operations plan approved by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and then we have got to build these ports, and then we can build the project. So I would say, I'm not trying to be cagey, that you'll start to see us, knock on wood, if all goes to plan, building ports in 2022, building foundations in 23, and putting cables in 24, 25, and getting Empire 1 up in 25, 26. Now, those are subject to change. I want to stress that. But like I said, we've built in a nice buffer. So I hope that they won't change. But we try to keep everything up to date on our website, empirewind.com and beaconwind.com. And so, watch the space. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Julia. The second question that I have for you is, can you please share, we've had a number of questions, so I'm paraphrasing and packing a number of related questions together, but can you please describe Equinor's supplier engagement process, whether with regards to construction works or other potential scopes? How can interested companies learn more about getting involved in your supply opportunities from your portfolio?
Sure, thanks. The most valuable resource for us has been the NYSERDA Offshore Wind Supplier Database. And I highly encourage anyone with any kind of business to go and register on the database and put in a lot of keywords. Don't just put consultant, because you could be a consultant on birds or sand, so don't be afraid to use a lot of keywords. We are committed to always giving the first shot to New York companies. And we use the supplier database a lot. That said, the project is basically broken into 5 prime packages, and each one of those will have a prime contractor and then many, many subcontractors. So when we choose those primes, which has not happened yet, we will pass along our commitments to the New York supply chain, and those suppliers will have to deliver on our New York commitment. So they will use New York companies and hire locally. So NYSERDA has convened some great events on this. We try to show up at all the different events that have happened over the last few years, but really getting on that database is a great way to ensure that that you'll be considered by us and later by our primes and subs.
Great, thank you, Julia. Appreciate that. We're going to pivot in a moment to a couple of environmental questions that have come in, but want to just carrying off of the point that you brought up, we had a similar question that came in. To what extent are New York State suppliers being prioritized? And that's exactly what I was going to encourage, Julia, was the opportunity, the New York State supplier opportunity provision in our contract, and likewise the supply chain database. So just to further emphasize, everything that Julia just described in the use of the database that is live and is accessible, feel free to go and have a look, and to nominate yourself to register there directly, and indicating that you are interested in getting involved in the offshore wind industry. We also have contractual provisions to this effect from our first 2 projects, again with Empire Wind 1 and Sunrise Wind with Ørsted and Eversource, whereby there's an obligation to consult with the database in addition to its ease and practicality, but to look and make sure that those opportunities are being solicited of New York State businesses. So if you are interested, please, again, have a look. It is located on our website, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have as to how to register yourself. We also, as part of the registration, there's a series of prompts, naturally, but one of the key prompts that we seek is your qualification as a a minority and women-owned business, likewise a service-disabled veteran-owned business, recognizing, again, the priority from a supply chain perspective and supplier perspective, not just in localizing activities, but also in supporting strategically MWBEs and SDVOBs as part of our procurement processes on an ongoing basis. So please do avail yourself of those opportunities, and we are really looking forward to the moment in time when we can host supplier forums again. Those have been incredibly successful in the past. We learn a lot. Hopefully the attendees have learned a lot and made really powerful connections to understand, where do I fit in the ecosystem of offshore wind? It's an important question and it takes some time to figure out. And so that's what these forums are about. And just as soon as the time is ripe, and it is safe to do so, you can bet we're going to be right back out there and really looking forward to that opportunity. So thank you, Julia. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay, so pivoting now, there is a question here about our environmental work, and particularly, are we engaging with regional ocean partnerships to share data? And if not, are we planning to? I'd like to call upon my colleague, Kate McClellan-Press, please, to join. Oh, rats. My apologies. We're at 3:30. Kate, would you like to answer that question? And then we'll wrap up, folks. We've just, the time has gotten away with us.
Sure, just really quickly. It's a great question. One of our priorities is really to facilitate looking at data at a regional level. And as Greg spoke to with ROSA and the RWSE, coordination between groups like that is very important. We are also working with ECO and their offshore wind collaborative. So yeah, sharing data at a regional level is a high priority.
Thank you so much, Kate. And with that, folks, we are at time. It is 3:30 Eastern, and we are grateful for your ability to spend some time with us. Again, this presentation will be made available hopefully in the coming days or week forward. And we look forward, as always, to ongoing questions. If your question was not answered here today during the short time that we had, again, we do encourage you to send it to offshorewind at nyserda.ny.gov, and we look forward to the next opportunity to connect, hopefully next time in person. So thanks all very much. Appreciate again your time. Take care.